Thank you guys for joining us. If you could just take a few moments to introduce ourselves. So we'll start with Amanda.
Sure. Hi, my name is Amanda. I'm the COO and co-founder of Tavia Health. We're building an insurance operating system for speech, physical, and occupational therapy practices.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Melody. I currently work in strategy and operations at Ambience Healthcare. We are an AI documentation platform for clinicians. You may have heard of Abridge. We are their competitor. And my day-to-day, I do all kinds of things. I sort of have my hands in every department and mostly just find operational improvements to make, set up central reporting functions, and work with leadership on various priorities.
Really cool. Nice to meet you both. Melody, we'll get started with you. You were the first Ambience Health first business operations hire at a company building directly into clinical documentation. What did the first 90 days look like for you?
So that's an interesting question. The first 90 days, I didn't formally have work. They just hired me and were kind of like, can you help us look at stuff and see what there is to improve and just do your thing. So I mean, I was grateful because it was a very high trust environment where I could go in and there was trust that I wouldn't just do nothing. So I basically in the first 90 days it was a lot of learning, meeting everyone at the company, figuring out how things work, because it is a bit of it was an environment that I was not familiar with, just because there was such a strong tech arm. It was at the time at the forefront of AI. Now we have all kinds of AI, but at the time it was probably one of the most well-funded healthcare companies, just because of the buzziness of AI. And so it was interesting being plugged into an engineering function that was so strong and so close to the science. They were all based in SF. And on the flip side, we also had a very strong both clinical and I guess you call it operational function. Our deployment team was very big. It was honestly very well run, but there are all kinds of things to think about when setting up something so novel at such large health systems. You kind of need all hands on deck. And it was interesting seeing clinicians doing a lot of the work. We have a lot of MPs, PAs, doctors who are involved in the company in various ways. So figuring out how everyone did stuff. Don't get me started on the sales team. That was kind of crazy. So that was where we sort of after my listening tour, the diagnosis was you guys need to set up a lot of infra here. And so that's what I spent probably the tail end of my 90 days and the subsequent few months working on.
Wow, cool. You talked about building something new. So Amanda, what are the operation fundamentals you think any co-founding team should be thinking about when the product is in development?
Yeah, so I would say when the product is in development, maybe hasn't launched yet, even if you're on an operational team, I think it's super important. You have to be really in tune with what's happening. So it's less of an execution-based role and more so, what are the subtle cues that you're getting from your users? What are the subtle things that are working and not working? And you don't have a lot of data behind that yet, so it's kind of on you to identify what are the metrics that you care about and how do you make sense of kind of silence, make sense of such an early stage problem. So I would say for us, even though I am operational, I was heavily involved in just speaking to users, speaking to potential customers, and trying to distill something from nothing. And I think just at that point, being able to really identify the atomic unit of the problem that you're solving for is the most important part. And then once you actually develop the product, scale the product, and achieve some level of product market fit, then it's a lot more of measuring what's happening and adapting to structure versus kind of mass ambiguity. So I would say that's what it looked like early on in developing our product, was just a lot more intuition and some level of data, but it was a lot more art than science.
Yeah. I would love to hear your thoughts on that as well, Melody.
I think that's right. Obviously, I represent the growth stage side of things, so not as there are functional 0 to 1s that I would have to do, but I've not built something that people wanted from scratch, from literally nothing. So I think a lot of it early on is just being really deep in the problem, and sometimes it is just vibes. There are no numbers, but deep in your heart that I started this company because this is a problem to solve, and I know it's a problem. That's probably the right path to go down until you can't collect something like data or metrics.
Really cool. Just continue along the line of what you mentioned of going to market. So you acted as the interim head of go-to-market ops and built out the reps ops function from scratch. How did you figure out what needed to be built from executive level objectives?
So the executive objectives. This was interesting because, like I alluded to earlier, that they needed a lot of infra, and so that's how this like GTM ops need came to be. It wasn't something that like the founders were like, we're hiring you because we need GTM ops, because I was not a GTM expert. So if that's what they knew they needed, they would have hired somebody who's done that before. So I think it was, so when I went on like the big like listening tour and diagnostic, I realized that like certain questions kept coming up consistently, and so when they do keep coming up consistently and the like commercial team didn't have a way of answering those questions without like spinning up a bunch of work that would get thrown away or was like a one-off, that's when I knew that they needed something persistent. And so I would say it was just like the again, it's like this diagnostic of like, or like this root cause analysis of you keep asking these questions, you keep having to do new work to spin it up. We should just turn that into something that we can build and prioritize, because clearly if you keep asking about it, this is important, and so we should prioritize it. So I would say that's probably the executive aspect of it. The second is scoping, so also like knowing my limits. I was not a GTM expert when I started, and so thank goodness for AI, because really quickly, like I think what AI is good for is giving you the standard answer on a lot of these things. So like I had never done GTM ops before, but I could really quickly understand, okay, what do you need to do? You need to like build some infrastructure. You need to have like a working CRM. You need to do all these things. You should look into RevOps. So knowing what I could build with the assistance of AI and like what are net like non-lossy things that I could start to incorporate, and when to find an expert to like come do something that was more persistent and like based on the size of company we were, like I knew that I could only take us to a certain point, and then we would need an expert to take us to like an actual like good endpoint. And so I hired our head of RevOps, and I'm very happy about that, that I didn't have to do that anymore.
Okay, cool. You mentioned about like the priorities, so I wanted to ask Amanda, when you're early and resources are limited, how do you decide which customer segments get prioritized first in the operational sense?
Yeah, so our product is, I would say like the way we are developing our like technical product is very like operations led. It's based on kind of the helms of like what an insurance company would need to submit a claim for this type of practice. So there's a certain level of like requirements that are just like baseline needed. A lot of it is like data requirements. So those data requirements and the inputs that we need to deliver like an output that's 100% accurate is what's going to be prioritized for us. And then things that are, you know, making that experience like 20 times better, 20 times simpler for a practice, there's like some level of that we, you know, continue to work into our product. But the like amazing like delight of a product, I think those types of features have to be deprioritized in the early stages to just make sure that what we're doing is accurate, efficient, and like correct. So I would say that's how we've gone about like scoping our product roadmap. And then because it is so like operations led, there's when things don't fit into the product roadmap that are super important. We have like different tools that can kind of fill those gaps. So for example, if we're submitting like a prior authorization for a practice, like say there's like 10 things that have to be true and 9 of those are built into our product, then the other one thing has to be built in some sort of like ops workflow or something to kind of plug or fill the gap there. So I feel like sometimes it is really hard to prioritize because there's so many things that must be true in order for the product to work. But some of the like nicer, like changing something from, you know, a button to a swipe, like those types of things in the way that we're developing our product are definitely lower priority in this scheme of just like making sure the data and the input and the output is correct.
Okay, so when having these priorities in your hiring process, right, and especially in this time of AI, what roles are you hiring for, especially with those priorities? So I'll start with Amanda and then Melody.
Yeah, so one, we have like an amazing CTO who's been awesome in taking a lot of the things that I've learned operationally and translating that into our product. So we'll continue to hire more engineers who can help with that, especially on the AI front. But then I would say on the ops front, it's just someone who is really scrappy and a lot of our work involves like researching how certain payers do certain tasks. So I need someone that's able to like go to the ends of the earth to find the answers, because we're working in like constraints of regulations or insurance companies. And then I think also just being able to build things and have some level of like AI fluency. So typically in an ops role, like when I started off at a different behavioral health company a couple years ago on the clinical ops team, and it was kind of a requirement to be able to work with data, numbers, be really scrappy, work in spreadsheets. Now, like what I'm kind of looking for is someone that can use like low code or no code tools to build workflows and can stand up functions that would essentially replace the need to hire more people versus like managing teams of people, which is what in my previous ops roles we were doing. So I would say it's just like a scrappiness and like ability to run through walls, I think is super important at like an early stage company, especially on like on the ops side of things.
Okay, Melody, same question, and you had mentioned you hired someone, so maybe maybe talk along those lines.
Well, so I hired someone who was deeply an expert in what we were looking for, so it was a bit different. But I would echo that. Like I would call them like a full stack operator, just someone who can go from the like earliest, like most nebulous concepts and ideas to like an actionable output that I think was a requirement before AI and is still a requirement. You just speed up those cycles now with AI. Something else I will say I echo everything Amanda said, like even at a growth stage company, that kind of like fluency with AI tools is like candidly like a must now. If you are job seekers, like I would highly encourage you to like experiment with like Claude Code on the weekends and like just try to build a personal project that will go miles, that you can speak about like your experience with that. Something else I will say is that high EQ is more important now than ever, because everyone has the same, I was talking to someone in the room about this, like everyone has the same access to like a certain degree of expertise now. That is super easy, that's commoditized. Even like with like Codex and like certain like Claude applications, you just drop an Excel file, a lot of analyses are pretty decent, and if you have like some analytical background, you're able to like pressure test that. That's really good, but that is almost like table stakes now. Being able to like read what Claude or ChatGPT give you and like pressure test it, make it better, and customize it to your unique work environment is really, really important. And I think there's a meme a couple months ago about like there are like 4 types of like employees now. It's like slop cannons, hot people, and like I don't know if you guys have seen that meme. I can send it over later. But basically, slop cannons are a huge problem, and like just don't be a slop cannon. Make sure you understand and like really critically think about the output. And I would say if you worked in the pre-AI world, this will be very natural for you. If this is like your first foray into the workforce, like really like trust that you also have like a very intelligent brain, and make sure you like pressure test what this like intern equivalent is giving you.
So thank you for that answer. You mentioned that AI is changing the clinical and operational workflows. But what is AI not changing?
Yeah, I think what Melanie was saying of like human judgment, obviously, I think it's super easy and I've actually noticed this a lot. I see stuff on LinkedIn all the time where people are like, oh, I send out 3,000 cold emails a day. They're like perfectly tailored to like my user or whatever. And I keep getting a ton of emails for like funeral home director like products that are completely irrelevant. So I think one is I do think judgment is super important. I especially think like early on with growth, like being able to really know your customers, still be okay to speak to people, like knock on doors, go in to see what people do day to day. And if you're selling into like a clinical office or a doctor's office or a hospital system, you need to actually like be there. You need to see how people work. You need to like get to know humans. So I think that part of the job is super important, and the creativity as well. And I would say, I think like for example, taking like our financial model as a task that like I don't love to do, but I know all the inputs, I know the assumptions. I don't have to sit there and physically type it out anymore, but it's still important that I have a grasp on what's going on in my business and the drivers behind how it operates. So I would say that the like core competencies of your role probably don't change. Maybe you're doing less like manual input and output, but it's still really important to like embed yourself in your work and really get to know like the customers or the things that you're like working on, because it does show, and I think it's almost, it creates so much noise and distraction. And it takes a lot of time to also build a lot of this slop, so it's you might as well just like go knock on doors and get to know your customer rather than spending, you know, hours trying to automate some sort of go-to-market, you know, function that you don't know anything about yet. So I think it's just trying to be discerning about your time and reserving your time for things that are like uniquely human.
Anything you'd like to add, Melody?
Like, I can't underscore the like idea of like getting in the weeds and like understanding your unique situation, because like even without AI, that is still critically important, and with AI, that is even more important. So you're not giving like some off-the-shelf framework that is like generally applicable but doesn't actually solve anything at your company to whoever it is that asked for it, or like to solve whatever need.
This question I'm very excited about, because especially in a regulated clinical context, the cost of confidential wrong AI output is much higher than it is, let's say, like in marketing. How do you build judgment for catching the stuff that looks right but isn't?
So I would say like a big part of how we're building our product is like building a context layer on top of a standard model. So I would say for the things that we know how to do in a way that for a traditional like operational organization, you would write like an SOP. For a lot of the things that like we needed to train our model on, we write those SOPs, we put that into our context layer, and then we're able to execute tasks with like a certain level of confidence and accuracy. But we have kind of like a human in the loop dashboard where when things fail, someone comes in who would be more like operationally minded, who can address that failure point, go research like how do you fix this, write the equivalent of like an SOP again, and then put that back into the context layer to then train the model and like how you would do that going forward. So I think having those like flags and stop gaps for things that either fail because like the tech just doesn't work, or the AI is not actually able to complete the task fully, being able to have a way to filter those things out and then have a human come in and train it is super important. So I would say that's how we're handling it, is still obviously having a human in the loop and then having a really great like interface for that human to basically screen these like failure points. Because again, like I was saying, for us it's very input and output driven for what we're trying to do. So that's how we've kind of screened for that.
Okay, same question for you too, Melody.
We have a whole team of doctors and other like clinicians who run all of our evals. So I think that is really important. If you are, like for us, we are direct like workflow plugin for doctors to do doctor things. And so it's really important that you have doctors vetting the output of whatever your AI model is putting out. On the flip side, we also use a lot of AI tools, and we like just build like lightweight things that we distribute through the company. Their speed is way more important, and it's pretty low stakes. If something is wrong, like for example, if you have like a quiz you need to send out for like onboarding or training, it's okay if that's like not perfect. It's okay if you specify that you need a 95% pass rate, but then one of your questions is flawed, so it's only like 90% is achievable. Like that's totally fine. You guys can work around it because it's not something that is so critical to like patients' health.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess you segmented into my next question. Is there anything that you ship unedited on your side personally when you use AI? Melody mentioned like a quiz that she'll ship even if there's an error. Is there anything like that?
I feel like I skew so perfectionist. I'm like, do I allow errors? No, I do, obviously. I think it's stuff that's internal. I think stuff that's like maybe more so like part of our product that's more of like the user experience. So like someone thinks that this button should be green versus yellow. I think that those are less so like errors. It's more so just judgment. And I think I trust our team enough to like make those judgment calls, and we can always refine. So I would say that we allow a lot more like fluid around like work, and then in terms of like how I use stuff day to day, I actually like stopped using AI to keep track of my tasks, and I actually write stuff out now because it was getting so out of hand in terms of the amount of things it was like reminding me and prompting me on. So I think because I have so many priorities in a day, I just try to write down the top 6 things on paper and then actually check those things off. But I would say like I'm using it day to day to quickly get up to speed on how to do something, to build like our financial model, to help me prioritize our product roadmap, to do preliminary research on things. So it kind of goes back and forth, but I have definitely started to skew more towards like writing things down, just from like a pure like how I manage my work. But yeah, that's how I think about that.
Yeah, no, I write things down all the time as well. So we're gonna go to the lightning round. So the first question, what no-code, low-code tools are operators actually using? Melody, we'll start with you.
I think here it depends on your organization. So for example, I actually don't have access to Claude Code professionally because of security reasons. So I'm using a lot of Claude connectors, which is a huge unlock, especially with Notion. So we're a Notion-based company. Claude plus Notion plus Slack gets me through so much. There are other things, like I've set up stuff in Zapier, but to be honest, most of the stuff I do now is primarily within the Claude realm. Oh, Claude Cowork is another one, but yeah, like big Anthropic fan over here.
Yeah, similar, also use Claude. We also, and a big regret we didn't install sooner was something called N8N. So it's kind of like a Zapier, but I find it to be better, and you can use Claude to basically like write the code that you then put into N8N, and it connects a lot of different apps together, and it connects to our database. So for those parts of our operational workflows that aren't in our product, it's a really good like stopgap for that. So I would say that's a really great one. And then yeah, I use like Claude Code, Cowork, Claude daily. But N8N was like a game changer for our company, especially operational, and really has allowed us to like actually evaluate cutting potential roles that we would have hired for in the future, just given its like powers.
Okay. Amanda, one ops mistake founders often make.
I think just generally under-investing in ops, because I think you're so pushed to focus on growth, but without having a strong like operational function. I've seen in a lot of health tech companies that things break down either operationally, compliance-wise. So I think there's obviously a balance, but really important to like hire a strong operator and someone that's like data-minded early on, because I think that can change the trajectory, whether it's a care delivery company, whether it's a health tech company, or an AI company.
Yes, very strongly feel about this. OKRs. You may or may not need OKRs, and I think it is a mistake to force yourself to go through that exercise if you didn't need it, or if you're not ready for like something as robust as OKRs. Oftentimes, like we've gone through multiple iterations of this. We tried OKRs, it didn't work. Then we tried like something called A+ problems, that worked, and then we went back to OKRs. So like it's an interesting cycle of like, because it sort of feels like this thing that all tech companies do, you kind of feel pressured, like you have to do it. You have to do it for your investors. You have to do it for whatever reason. No, like customize it to whatever makes sense for you guys. Don't like create another, like an artificial like timeline for like getting something done that doesn't actually like reflect the reality of your business.
Okay, thank you. I'll do this last lightning round question, and we'll go to questions from the audience. So one workflow many startups are still doing manually that they shouldn't be.
Honestly, any like internal like not graphics, but like if you're making slide decks to communicate with each other, just don't do that. I can't speak for all startups, but like yeah, internal like reporting and like if you're writing stuff to another person in the company, I think there's a big use case for just having something whipped together quickly with AI, but like you put the thinking into it and you make it as unsloppy and like as concise as possible. There's a lot that you no longer have to like spend time moving boxes. I don't know. Maybe I say this from like a consulting background. There's a tendency for some people who come in to like start making slides automatically. You do not need to do that. Use Notion, have Claude make your boxes, and then put the text in yourself. Like, you know, there's a lot you can do there.
And for you, Amanda, any?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I don't know, this is very niche, and I actually don't know if it's totally applicable to all founders, but I've noticed, including peers that have healthcare AI companies that are much more well-funded than mine in later stage, is like invoicing customers manually, and a lot of it just stems from like the complexities and, you know, how the business is run, and maybe not having a central like source of truth for the type of work that was done, but especially for things that are in like the billing and like revenue cycle side of things, it just invoicing customers is very challenging because there's like lags in revenue. So I don't know, that's a very niche use case, but I've myself, we were doing invoicing in a very manual way and payroll in a very manual way, and I've seen peers do it. So I think it just stems from having like more clear like operations set up. And
So I'll turn it over to the audience if anyone has any questions for Amanda and Melody.
Hi guys, thanks for the talk. So my question is for Melody. Coming from consulting land and going into startup land, what was the biggest surprise for you switching gears like that?
So I think the biggest surprise for me was like in consulting, if any consultants are in the room, you probably currently or came from an environment where your day is just absolutely stacked with meetings, but each meeting had its purpose. It was interesting to come to a company that didn't come from that sort of like time rigor, I would say. And like people just put time on your calendar and they're like, we have this topic, let's talk about it. What outcome are we driving? Oh, I don't know, like let's just chat about it and then we'll figure it out. Like that was very different for me. And so it's something that I think actually like if you are a consultant and you're looking to get into health tech, or if you like came from consulting, you'll probably resonate. Like it is really it's underappreciated how good it is, like how useful of a skill it is just to be able to run an effective meeting, drive towards outcomes, and then take that and like go do the thing. Like that's, I don't know, like I always appreciate consulting background folks who can do that because it's a very familiar work environment that is like how I learned to operate.
Thank you. So I have a question for Amanda, and thank you all. In the beginning, France asked you about your first 90 days, and you said something that I thought was really interesting, was like making sense of the silence. And when you were developing your product, and especially now considering how focused and important operations is, I'm just curious if you could maybe talk a little bit about that kind of moment of silence and kind of how you evolved to where you are today.
Yeah, so I actually read, when we first started the company, we read this article. It was by First Round, and it's called something about like atomic unit like testing for companies. So it was talking about how when you go to start a company, and they gave an example of like someone that's starting a digital course company. Like you can go and build like the most fancy app and have all these bells and whistles and have a way to like run these courses that people are signing up for. But like the core of what you're trying to test is like, does someone care about your course and like will they attend? So you can send them a Zoom link, make a slide deck, and post a link somewhere and see if someone will pay for it, and test like what is that behavior that you're trying to drive. So we started to think about like what is the atomic unit of what we're trying to test here. And for us it was like, when we started off, it was helping clinicians start practices. So we posted a job posting on Indeed. We had people come to us because they saw private practice clinical, will help you take insurance. So the behavior that we were trying to drive was like, do people want to do this? Do they care about it? Will they take steps? And will they go through like an interview process with us potentially? So it wasn't like, okay, today we're going to sit down, code an app, credential with insurance companies, hire 50 people. So I think it's like getting really, really specific about what you're trying to test, coming up with some hypotheses that you have around it, and then figuring out really cheap, like scrappy tests. And then you just get data from that, and you have to be, I was also in consulting before. I was at another startup before this, and you have a ton of data and a ton of, conviction around certain things to make decisions. But like I was saying, you just have to trust your instincts of like, if 50 people sign up and they all talk to you and they're telling you a problem, like kind of just go with that and then do it again and do it again until you like figure out what your wedge is and figure out what your product is. But I would say just like removing the barriers to entry, but especially this was even pre like a lot of these no-code tools. I think it's easy now to sit down and be like, I have an app idea and I'm going to sit on Lovable and make it overnight. But have you talked to people? Do you know the behavior you're trying to drive? So I would say that is like how you make sense of the silence. And I think it actually makes stuff a lot easier when you have like user data, and you have to like have conviction in your output. So I would say that's kind of how we made it through that phase. And I would say more recently even is when we've really figured out our wedge and really, I think, like, are hitting product market fit. But it just took a lot of those types of tests, and we'll like continue testing in that way as well.
Hi. So I'm curious about Melody. You mentioned that when you started in Ambience, it was a lot about figuring things out as you went. So as company matures and like strategy and ops teams evolve, I guess, how could you maybe describe how those needs evolve on those companies, and like what type of professionals, I guess, and skills are companies looking through going from, I guess, seed, Series A, Series B, and so on?
Yeah, I would welcome Amanda's answer on this as well, because she is like very much from the like nothing to like C to A and all that. But I would say from my observations, again, because I am like at a growth stage company, I think seed and early on, it's like the founders first, and then you probably pretty quickly want like a super generalist, like a chief of staff type, and I think all kinds of backgrounds end up working in that capacity. But I think that is really important, like just someone who you can partner with who really deeply understands the crux of the business and is able to like drive 100 different, like completely different jobs forward. I think that is really important. And then I think when you get closer to like a B, C, when the company starts to scale and there are things that are just like breaking from, it's not like anybody wants to create an ineffective, like an inefficient company. It just happens because you don't have time to like, you built so fast and you have to now like make that optimal. Like nobody's had time to go do that. And so I think when you start to feel the pain at like a BC type, that's probably when you want like a proper function to go around and start like basically what I did, which is be dropped in, like go diagnose something and then fix it. I think like having someone whose mandate is that probably isn't as useful when you're like still trying to figure out like product market fit and like getting investors and all that. But yeah, I'd welcome what Amanda has to say on this.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I was at, like I was saying, another behavioral health startup before this, and I was an early ops hire, so I think myself and my peers who were hired for that were kind of, to what Melody was saying, like good at just, like there's literally fires everywhere, and it's like, okay, put this one out, move to the next, like learn, build something. It's not gonna look good, it's gonna break probably, but it just gets the company forward. And then I think at the Series B and towards the end of that Series B and Series C, which is when I left that company, it was definitely a lot more like, okay, we have a roadmap now, we're going to prioritize things, and you know, there's still people that are deployed to go fix specific problems, but it's a very different like way of working. So I think, and it's very interesting, like a lot of the folks that were hired with me at that company have gone on to start companies as well, just because it's a similar skill set of like, just, you know, this, I'm over here one day, I'm over there another day, and you, like there's a certain archetype that likes that type of work, and then I think over time you can still get hands-on and you can still learn a lot at a Series B and a Series C company, but there is a level of like structure that, you know, starts to happen. And I think also I've seen people go from early on to like, you know, seed or Series C plus and still enjoy that. So it just really depends on the like type of person, but I've seen definitely like different archetypes of people gravitate towards either.
Yeah, and just one other thing I'll add too is like, I think the chief of staff archetype, if any of you are doing that or interested in that, I think it's less variable at the early stage, but it is way more variable at a later stage. Like you could be anywhere from a glorified EA to still being like a strategic partner, almost like a chief strategy officer type. So I would just say that's another observation I've had, that there can be different types of ops roles with that name as the company grows.
I really love the conversation today, especially as the operator myself, a lot of things resonate. I think, Amanda, you mentioned founders tend to underestimate the operator's role, or like that's usually sort of the last one to hire on the team. And how did you... And usually when they hire, it's still kind of the least important because budget, effort put on developers, put on sales. So how did you work with the founders or try to help founders know that you got to put more in operations? And I think, Melody, you mentioned like hire a go-to-market expert after you because you can only do so much, and oftentimes founder just let AI do it, and then you can handle that. So I don't know if you have encountered such situation. How did you try to help founders know that we actually need more, even though it doesn't seem kind of, you're paying someone, but it actually pays off in the future.
Yeah, so I would say, and I don't know the specifics on like what problem you're solving, but again, I came from a behavioral health startup. It was a care delivery company, so it was pre-AI, so it was a very human capital intensive, and I learned a lot through that experience of like investing in data early on, investing in like product and technology, but we still needed people who were on the ground basically figuring out what to even build or do, and that can come like in a larger organization. Like when I worked in consulting, I was doing product management for banks, so there was always some like stakeholder subject matter expert that then the PM would talk to and get, you know, insights from. But in a lot of like healthcare care delivery companies, or even like healthcare operational companies, like the ops team is that like business subject matter expert, and they're telling product or engineering like what to build or what to prioritize. So I think it is like a super important role for so many reasons, and without that, like you don't have someone that's like embedded so deeply in the company and has all of this like legacy knowledge of how things operate, and that's kind of that role that you're like building for. And I think with AI today, like again, it solves for a lot of the roles or like need to hire, but you still need someone that's like, okay, I was gonna hire this person and they were gonna do exactly these roles, but now I need to like build, like I need to have the context on what to build to replace that person. So you need like that Swiss Army knife / like operator that can just become really good at something and then learn how to pass it off, which in the past might have been through hiring, but today maybe is through building something. And I think the cost of not doing that is like, you're gonna have to eventually hire more humans to kind of like, to fill the gaps in what you couldn't have like built or automated. So I don't know if I'm making sense or if it like applies to your, you know, specific use case, but I think it's like a super important role, especially in like regulated industries, especially in healthcare, and especially when there's like a care delivery or like operational component to the company. And then also it impacts like the service delivery of what you're offering. So of course you want to invest in growth and sales, but you know, as a founder especially, like you should be like driving like the product development, you should be driving sales. So if you don't invest in like an ops person, the founder's gonna be doing invoicing, they're gonna be doing tedious tasks to the end of time when their time should be used like elsewhere. So I think that's like another way to like think about the ROI.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think there's this concept of like your zone of genius, and so what your unique, like you uniquely should be working on these problems because you're best suited to solve them in your company. And so like to the founder point, a founder should not, like early on when you don't have like the budget to hire like, I don't know, an accounts receivable person or like anyone in accounting or control or anything, you're probably gonna have to just do that. But at some point, when that task against the balance of other tasks you have to do is just way less important, and there's enough of that for a full-time hire, it's probably time to bring someone on. Secondly, I think AI has made it easy to get to good enough, but in my case, like you spoke about when we had to hire like a head of RevOps, me doing RevOps persistently with AI was probably good, but we knew it wasn't great, and we knew it wasn't sophisticated enough for the stage that we were at. And so luckily there's budget to hire this person. But like we all knew, like after I did the assessment of saying, this is your problem, I can get you here, you really need the rest of it. And to do this, it needs to be somebody new. I could spend like a year learning how to like configure our CRM properly, but it's probably not a good use of my time, and it's probably not a good use of like the money that they pay me to go do that when I could be doing my zone of genius stuff in other departments. And so I would say those are probably like two ways to think about it.
Thank you. That's all the questions for now. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Melody. And give them a round of applause.
Thank you. It's great.